Hello, welcome to the Roundtable. We bring you expert analysis on current affairs and news from all over the world. Get ready for what we offer you today. We are joined by Professor Lee In-bok. Welcome to the Roundtable.
Thanks for the welcome. A pleasure to be here.
We are also joined by Dr. Jo Bi-yeon. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We start with the general elections in India. The elections are dubbed the world's biggest exercise in democracy. The elections kicked off on April 19th, but ballots will be counted on June 4th. In other words, the elections are held for 44 days. Dr. Jo, why these marathon elections in India?
Yes, as you just mentioned, it will last 44 days because it is the largest democratic exercise. Mm-hmm. India's election involved 970 million voters, and in 2019, the voter turnout was 67%. Mm-hmm. So the elections involve just a massive number of people. And this election actually involves 18 million new eligible voters. And throughout the whole process, it needs 1 million installation of the polling stations. So it is quite inevitable that it will take 44 days.
All the numbers you mentioned about democracy in India seem so large, right?
Yes.
Everything is multi-million.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Lee, when we talk about India, we must talk about this person, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Could you tell our viewers about him?
Right. Narendra Modi has been a central figure in Indian politics, starting from 2014, serving as the Prime Minister. He comes from the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP in short. And many suggest that under his tenure, India has shown a very robust economic performance. For example, under his leadership, India implemented a number of structural economic reforms, including goods and services tax, which streamlined the taxation process and helped, as many suggest, the overall economic growth and performance. These reforms and the subsequent economic growth has raised some expectations about continued economic performance in the coming years for India. At the same time, I think there has been a number of criticisms about his leadership style. For example, he has this very notable communication style, for instance. Instead of talking directly to the press in an open conference, he would use things like the social media or try to use these international events like the G20 leadership for his personal branding, only inviting at times reporters who are more supportive of him. So these tendencies, which many dubbed as sort of nationalistic, populist tendencies of his leadership style, has been also subject to these criticisms, both domestically as well as internationally.
I see. Well, it is no secret that India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and thanks to this booming economy, the image of India has been drastically improved. Could you tell our viewers about India in numbers?
India is in its new high. It has maintained 7% strong economic performance since 2021. And in 2023, it emerged as the fastest economy in the world. And also, population-wise, India just surpassed China in 2023, becoming the largest market of population and consumers. And the prospect for further growth is, I think, very high, because if we look at their population, their working age population between 25 to 64 is about 50%. Wow. So we should expect more productivity.
It's a really young population.
Yes, it is.
Wow. Recently, the IMF forecast that India's GDP will surpass Japan's in 2025, and it will become the world's fourth largest economy. Bloomberg Economics also presented a surprising prediction that India could overtake the United States and China to become the world's #1 contributor to the global GDP growth as early as 2028. Dr. Lee, this is an amazing story, but is this sustainable? Economic growth of India can be sustained in the future?
I think it's very difficult to tell. Certainly, if you look at the numbers and the projections coming out from these organizations like the IMF, for instance, it seems like India is looking forward to kind of a rosy future. At the same time, I think it'll be very important to try to think about sort of the political economy concerns or how to manage the macroeconomic expectations. For example, the European Parliament recently mentioned some concerns about how much of inclusivity or respect for diversity can be sustained in India. For instance, they have passed Citizenship Amendment Act in 2019, which provoked some controversies regarding who can get Indian citizenship, and to some extent maybe opening the possibility of excluding certain groups of people in the society from being Indians based on religious or other affiliations. So if you think about these sort of nationalistic or populist sort of movements in India currently, this can certainly possibly lead to undermining, say, foreign direct investments in the future, or we also know that populist governments tend to have these tendencies to quickly overturn their policies at times, which can again further undermine international investments as well. So for the economic growth to be sustained in the future, I think one of the most important things to consider for the Indian politics would be to seriously think about how to make this society in terms of a more liberal and inclusive society, such that the economic reforms can be continued.
I see. In this closely connected world, era of the globalization, countries inevitably affect each other. There must be some nations greatly benefiting from such a rapid rise of Indian economy. Who are they?
As discussed earlier, India has a very young population. So what this means to firms abroad is that they will easily find the labor force at lower wage. And also, India is known for a very rich pool of local engineering talents. So for foreign firms, it's very lucrative in terms of workforce. And also, due to India's growth, firms abroad are benefiting from it, especially in the semiconductor industry. In fact, India is about 5% of global semiconductor demands. This has to do with India's recent digital transformation, more need for electronics for the population themselves, and also transformation to informative technology and automotive. So those are the key firms and sectors.
Right, and from the perspectives of the foreign investors and companies, mostly from the English-speaking civilization, it is a huge benefit that young population in India can speak in English.
That's right.
Dr. Ri, let's move back to one of the points that you made, the sustainability of India's economic growth. And well, economic growth cannot just come without any problems, right? What kind of problems are very pressuring to the Indian government and economy, and what are the obstacles for Indian economy to actually reach the level of so-called advanced economies in the world?
Certainly agree with Dr. Zhou earlier that there are a number of opportunities as well as challenges that Indian economy will be facing in the future. The growth of the population and useful population in particular means that they're going to have much larger active labor force, which will be great for the economy in general. At the same time, how best you can manage youth unemployment, for example, or with the rapid urbanization, how much you can promote sustainable city management, or say, considering the overall levels of inequality in the Indian economy, how can you better provide redistributive policies through, say, things like progressive taxation? I think all of these policy measures in the future will be very important to consider. But going back to one of the points that I was making earlier, I think in the broader picture, setting up some sort of goals for social norms or social expectations for, again, diversity and inclusivity will be, I think, also crucial for India in thinking about these policy measures as well. For example, under Modi's tenure, India started out as electoral democracy, as classified by these democracy watchers, like the varieties of democracy, so-called VDEM, but now has gone down to the level of electoral autocracy. And since for the past 3 or 4 years, and has been staying there for a while. So if you think about these concerns from the international community about the inclusivity, about illiberal policies, about the nationalist tendencies and so on, these can certainly become risk factors in further pursuing growth and especially sustainable growth in the future, which I think is something that the Indian economy as well as politics should seriously consider as it moves forward.
For a long time, the world was familiar with China as the fastest growing economy with the biggest population in the world. Now India has replaced China. The future of India for its experiment of democracy and economic development is a critical component of the world politics and economy. Let's move on to the next topic. This product is currently extremely popular in the United States and Europe. Let's check it out on a video clip and find what it is.
For decades, ramyun has been a comfort food for Koreans. Now, it has stolen the heart of a young girl. For her birthday gift, she received neither a puppy nor a Disneyland ticket. It was Korean ramyun. American rapper posted a 3-minute video clip on her social media account featuring her trying the Korean instant noodles. In the video, she described how she drove 30 minutes to find the noodles.
I drove 30 minutes so I could finally get it.
Her reviews on ramyun have gone viral on social media. The New York Times analyzed factors for the popularity of this ramyun. Tinged with the cheesy flavor of spaghetti carbonara, it tastes more sophisticated than other instant noodle options. It possesses the appeal that make people approach it more easily. Another factor is that people can add other ingredients of their choice to spice up a bowl of this ramyun. Plus, its fans say, the ramyun looks good on camera. Last year, Korean ramyun marked its 60th birthday and its exports hit a record high at nearly $1 billion. Thanks to a growing demand in overseas markets, ramyun exports have increased by 30% this year, compared to the same period of the previous year. The US is the largest ramyun importer. China and the Netherlands rank second and third, respectively, followed by Japan and the Philippines. In particular, ramyun is enjoying huge popularity in the Netherlands. The European country overtook Japan to become the third largest importer of Korean ramyun. There are more than 500 different ramyun products available, ranging from jajang-flavored Chinese-style ones to stirred noodles. Recipe variations are nearly limitless, depending on when to put the seasoning in water or whether or not to boil the noodles twice. Korean ramyun is receiving unprecedented attention, as a global craze is sweeping across the world beyond the US and Europe.
When I saw the girl crying in delight, I guess it would be a brand new smartphone or a game console. I was really surprised to learn that it was Korean ramyun. What was your impression?
Right, that was certainly a reaction, right? It reminded me of a time a couple of years ago when I was trying to get some Pokemon breads for my kids, which is very difficult to get, and I can still remember the joy my children had when they were able to get their hands on it. At the least, certainly this makes me feel like I should give it a try for this ramen. I haven't done it before, and now I'm very curious how it tastes.
Dr. Jo?
I was actually very surprised because my first experience of ramyun abroad was on the Alps in 2000. And when I tried ramyun, they sold ramyun at the top of the mountain. But when I tried that, I had to look out for the smell because people were watching. They were very foreign to the food. But now it's a very different world we are living in.
People get accustomed to the smell. Right, good. Considering its popularity on the social media and the volume of its exports, it's clear that Korean ramyun is taking the world by storm. So, Dr. Jo, what accounts for this global popularity of ramyun?
I think there are two things. One is we are more culturally diverse, more diffusive, thanks to the SNS and also OTT services like Netflix and that feature those ramens. And the other thing is I think it's definitely the power of K contents. From parasites to BTS, we are more accustomed to our culture, and I think people are more willing to try our food.
I see.
Yes.
I have a question for our viewers. Can you guess which country imports the Korean ramen most? It is the United States that is the largest importer of Korean ramen. Korean ramen is explosively popular in the US market. Professor Lee used to live in the United States, right?
Right.
What accounts for this appeal of Korean ramen to Americans?
Right. I certainly agree with Dr. Cho earlier. The popularity of K-culture, for instance, the music, the movies, and other contents might have had some spillover effects for the Americans to also want to know more about Korean food and cuisine as well. At the same time, I think the American society has been generally more open to diverse cultural products in general, and it seems like there has been increasing appetite for Asian cuisine as well. So it may be the case that Korean food and especially ramen sort of tapped into that kind of a change in taste or a greater popularity of generally more Asian products, and then within that making these differences. As a political scientist, I also should mention that I think we need to think about preparations that happened before this popularity struck. For instance, it's been now years since we had the Korea-US free trade agreements, and ramen was one of the products that got the treatment for better access to the US markets through the KOROS FDA from a very early onset, which helped, I believe, for the Korean ramen to penetrate into the US market. The Korean ramen companies have been also putting forward efforts to enhance local productions of ramen in the United States, or investing more into distribution networks in the US. And I think these efforts that have been ongoing in the US with the sort of newly emerging taste for cultural products kind of coincided together to make these changes possible.
Very interesting. Another interesting point is the Netherlands is the third largest importer of Korean ramen. China is the second largest ramen importer, and it is somewhat understandable since China is an Asian nation close to the Korean peninsula. But it was somewhat unexpected that the Netherlands, a European country, ranked so high. Is there a special reason for Netherlands so attracted to Korean ramen?
The K culture did sweep across the Europe, that's one thing. The other thing is that Netherlands has been the center, the hub of European trade. About 50% of the trade items go through Netherlands. So what this means for ramen exports is that the more ramens are exported to Europe, the more ramens go to Netherlands first. So Netherlands ramen increases as well as the European ramen exports. Okay.
Professor Lee, you mentioned the political science aspect of the popularity of ramen in the United States and the global scales, and the Korean ramen companies made strategic decisions like the expansion of its production facility overseas. Could you tell us more about those?
Right, so the leading ramen companies, Korean ramen companies, have been making investments for local production in the US as well as other countries as well. So according to my research, for instance, Nongshim, one of Korea's leading ramen manufacturers, have established multiple foreign production locations, including places like the US, but also in Japan, Canada, China, Australia, and Vietnam. Overtook also has been operating in the US as well as Vietnam, China, New Zealand. So these kind of efforts, I think, have made it possible for them to meet the local demands much more quickly and more effectively as well. Samyang Foods, on the other hand, I think this is very interesting, had a very different approach. So instead of establishing production factories in the US, they created a export-dedicated production factory in Korea, in Miryang, and has been operating from there to make the export products. So I think it will be interesting to see how these divergent strategies across the different ramen companies will play out in the future.
I see. Having listened to your explanation, it seems like it's very important for all these producers to focus on how to expand global markets.
Right, and I think so far these efforts have been very successful, but for this to move further, I think there needs to be further considerations, not just for sort of global standard level product quality, but also sort of the corporate governance sort of mentality or structure that can meet the global standards as well. I think about 10, 20 years ago, in the early 2010s, there were these antitrust cases against these ramen companies in the US related to allegedly some cases about price fixing. And there, the litigation was basically about high-level boards and senior-level management decisions about ethical issues, about transparency, really about the general sort of sustainable corporate governance issues as well. So for Korean companies to now get more closely integrated into the global market, we'll need to think very carefully about how we can respect and sort of adapt to these different standards in the local markets, and think about, again, not just better quality products, but also how we can sort of manage our practices better as well.
It will be also important to find and develop more overseas markets in addition to the US, China, and the Netherlands. Korea remained on the top spot in terms of per capita ramen consumption, but in 2022, it was outpaced by this country. Can you guess?
I certainly have no idea. At the least, now I feel like I haven't done a fair share as a good Korean citizen to eat up the ramen, to keep up at the top spot.
All right. As of 2022, each Vietnamese person consumed 85 servings of ramen annually, which is the most in the world. It is also the third largest ramen eating country in the world. All these corporations of ramen producers must target countries like Vietnam, right?
Yes. In Vietnam, the Shin Ramyun is known to cost about 9 times more than the local noodles, but they are very well sold. So it's a really lucrative market for ramen. And I think Korean firms have been already active, as Professor Lee mentioned earlier. For instance, the firms like Palto, they already established their factory in 2012, and Otugi, they also set their factory in about 2018. So they have been very active. Yet I would say there are also some challenges. For instance, as I mentioned, the cost is quite high than the local noodles. And also the other thing is, Professor Lee mentioned about the Samyang factory. That's, for me, was also very interesting because for Samyang, their strategy is made in Korea ramen. So that's their brand. But there is also call that the firms need to meet the taste of the local areas to adapt the ramen to their specific. So it really depends on the strategies of the firms, but there are more options to seek.
Ramen is easy to cook and easier to eat. Now ramen has emerged as a truly global gourmet. This is all for today. We'll be back next week with more trending issues. Dr. Jo and Professor Lee, thank you so much for sharing your interesting insights.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching and see you next week.